cut the lights down on that back wall?
Is there a way to do that?
Yeah, that switch over there. No, other side.
Just this one?
Yeah.
You want to close the door?
Oh,
Or
perfect.
you want to close the door?
If you wish. So, quality versus quantity. And it's a pretty simple theme, obviously. So I'm going to kind of fast forward to the position I'm talking about. So what we're talking about is a Pierce. Now you don't castle in this position is black because white just gets too easy of an attack. It's just not worth it. So instead you play c5, striking back at the center. More than likely white would take queen a5, and here's a point for your tactics. Why can white not play pawn takes d6?
Knight takes e4.
Thank you. That's correct. So bishop d3 is almost all is the correct choice, right? So black takes the pawn back, queen e2. Now black can castle. And bishop to e3, pretty simple. Now everyone from the past played queen a5 here. But queen b4 was the move I had prepared. And it has a pretty simple threat, take the pawn, correct? So does anybody want to defend that pawn?
It's a poison pawn, most likely, right? And black would be ill-advised to take it.
Maybe.
You could castle queenside.
Okay, so you want to try castle's queenside, this move. Well, there's a slight problem. Can anybody find it? Black to move.
Knight takes e4.
Correct. And the problem is, you take with the knight, and you have bishop there, king there, doesn't really matter where, and mate. So you can't take with the knight, and if you take with the bishop,
Bishop takes c3 first.
bishop takes c3, takes, and
Down.
no, it's not good. So castles is bad. So I'm going to explain the problem with rook b1, which is the other way to defend it, and the problem there is knight takes e4 again.
So pawn is pinned after
The knight is
takes.
pinned.
Yeah.
So after here, which is pretty obvious, you play here, and now the rook is under danger, and again, it's bad. So instead, the correct move, and the move I had prepared, was castles. So takes, which I had also prepared. Knight here. Now it looks like, to all intents and purposes, queen has no flight squares, because queen has no flight squares. The other problem is knight c7 is, oops, that's not a move, but knight c7 is a major threat that white has. So I had analyzed this move, creates a flight square, and here. And we're not going to look at a3, but a3 is probably white's best move. It forces a queen sacrifice, but e5. Now, the main line is to play queen to b4. We're going to evaluate the position. So, is anybody up in material? And this is the first thing you should look at when you start evaluating position, is material. What's the material situation?
Black's up a pawn, right?
Yeah, black is up a pawn. Okay. King safety. Who has a safer king? It's probably the next thing I'd look at.
Black has a safer king.
You can make arguments for either side. I would evaluate them as roughly the same. White has a lot more space in general. And white arguably has the initiative. White has a lot more activity as well. So, when you're looking at that, you should try to form a plan. What should black's plan be here? Up in material, but basically down everywhere else that matters in the position.
Get developed.
Yeah, development.
Exactly. You should be thinking about getting developed. Now, first you have to address the situation with your queen being dangerously close to en prise, because the second white plays rook here, that queen is hanging. So most of the time you don't actually, in this case, you don't have time to get developed. You have to play queen b4 first. Or do you? Well, I had prepared d takes e5. And it actually does help get active.
Takes that forward.
Because first, no, you don't want to play that yet. You first want to take the rook. Now, you had suggested this move. Does anybody want to, explain why that's bad? I actually kind of agree that in an ideal world, I would get rid of that dark squared bishop.
Bishop c5.
Bishop c5 is actually subpar because, well, this bishop can take the rook. Instead, you play bishop to d4. And now we're just trading off dark squared bishops, and black's king is starting to become unsafe. So instead, you play e4. And it doesn't really matter where the rook goes, I'd probably put it there. And at this point, I would take the bishop because I like bishops. Somebody get the door? Thank you, Chris. And probably takes with the pawn, and we're just going to develop now, right? And it's going to take a while for black to actually get developed enough to prove that he has enough compensation. It's a really weird situation. White still has more space, but is the king safer than black's? I wouldn't say so. White does have more activity, sure, and the material situation is rather unusual. Black has an extra pawn, number one, and we've got a queen for a rook and a minor piece. It's very weird. But using that, we're going to go to the next game, and no, we're not going to save that. So, this is a game played in 1962 by my own personal favorite player. His name is Rashid Nejmedinov, and that's a Russian name if you've ever heard one. Know how he's good? You can't say or spell his name. He was playing a guy named Oleg Chernikov, and this was played actually near where Ukraine is, hilariously, in Rostov-on-Don. And we're going to actually put an example of where we see a difference in material count versus the activity of one side. And we start with a Sicilian, and specifically an accelerated dragon. And if we have time, I'll show you what I play against the accelerated dragon, but that's if we have the time. So knight c3. This is the way I kind of prefer to play against these positions, just because at the end of the day, while I definitely think the Maroczy bind, these positions with the Maroczy bind, while I think they're good for white, I actually think they're close to winning. The problem is you really can't force the position. You can't play very directly, very tactically. You're just kind of cramping black until black eventually crumbles and gives up. So with knight c3, you get more tactical positions. Bishop to g7, very logical. And the point of the accelerated dragon is that black wants to play d5 in one move, right? So bishop e3, protecting the knight because it was attacked twice, defended once. Knight moves f6, not threatening the pawn, just preparing castles. Bishop c4, well, castle. Bishop to b3 because knight a5 or knight e5 could have been very useful moves. Get it out of danger. Knight g4. Okay, so what's this move all about?
You got a potential double attack on d4, and you also want to double white's pawn to d3.
Yeah, exactly. But isn't that knight hanging?
No.
Actually, it is. The reason why you can get away with this is that double attack that you mentioned. Is you can take on d4.
Well, it's hanging, but it's not hanging in the way that actually wins.
Exactly, yeah. So queen h4, queen a5, castles. And all right, so let's take a pause here and evaluate the position. What's the material count? Who is either side up in material is what I'm asking. Steven? Okay. Both sides have 2 bishops, both sides have a knight. Who has the safer king?
White.
Good answer.
I bet.
White has the safer king. Does either side have more space?
Not really.
Technically white does, but yeah, not really is how I would answer it. Does either side have the initiative? Basically the ability to make threats, to impose his will on the game.
You could argue for either side.
I would argue white, but I can see how black could make arguments. Okay, activity is pretty simple. White has a more active position, more pieces developed. And that's why I would argue that white, it has the initiative.
It's the light squared bishop for black that's kind of the issue right now.
Exactly. But weirdly, it's not the light squares that black needs to worry about. The dark squares for black are what he should be worrying about. So, what's a plan of action that we can use here?
If you could get a second piece attacking h7, that would be one thing.
Sure.
You could bust open maybe f4, f5.
Yeah, well, obviously once the danger is taken care of. But yeah, I see what you're saying there.
Yeah.
In general, you want to get rid of the dark squared bishop if you could, right?
Yeah.
If you could get that dark squared bishop on d4 and the queen on h6, game's over. Just depending on the other tactics involved.
Yeah.
Because you do have the pin on f7 blocking f6 at the moment.
Yeah.
For what that's worth. But you'd have to get there first.
All right. So y'all are coming up with some good ideas, mostly centered around kingside attack, getting rid of the dark squared bishop. So, candidate moves. Basically, what are the moves that you're looking at that you think might be a good idea?
So once you've handled your queen, which is under attack right now,
Yeah.
but I was looking at like something like rook to d1.
Well, let's start with in this position
For the
exactly.
queen,
So what would you do with the
Queen
with the
g3. Let's try queen g3.
Queen g3 kind of doesn't lead to anything.
Really?
It just kind of sits there. And honestly, it kind of gives black time to make threats in the position. You can start by, if I remember correctly, taking this. Computer actually prefers doing that. D6 is okay. Bishop back here is also reasonable. But I like ideas of d6. I think d6 is perfectly reasonable. Threatens to play bishop to e5, kicking the queen once again. And slightly improving the position of the black bishop. So I wouldn't play queen g3. Now I should mention this is a theoretical position. And up until this game, every single game went queen h6, bishop here, queen here, bishop here, and repetition.
I guess queen f4 is the other sane option.
Queen f4 is a bit risky because of queen takes here, and you're not winning a piece, but you're destroying the white position. So queen f4 be a little careful.
Bishop to G5 maybe.
Bishop G5, that's not
No.
completely insane, but there's problems. Knight takes B3. And this is where things get a little bit weird.
So you're saying Queen G4 is on the table?
Queen G4 is also
No.
D5.
Yeah, you
And your
know,
queen is having to move again.
I'm running out of places to put the thing.
You're running out of places to put the thing. You're running out of things to interpose. And this is the point I'm trying to get to, is that what are the ideal squares for your pieces? And this is actually a very difficult position, I'll give you that. First time I saw this game though, I will say I got it correct. Which probably is a bad thing, because it shows that that was the first move I even thought about, which is not a good thing to be doing.
Not a
But
queen's
what?
neck, is it?
But okay, so but what are the ideal squares for your pieces? What's the ideal square for your knight?
D5.
D5. Okay. Wouldn't it be great if black couldn't play E6 to kick it?
So you sack on F6.
Okay, we're getting there. And of course, once you sack on F6, notice that this diagonal is all of a sudden great for your bishop. You're starting to piece together a plan of attack on the king.
Except you're down a queen.
And yes, the correct answer in this was played after an hour of thought. Reportedly, Chernikov, the black piece, has gotten up and walked around the tournament hall and, was taking a walk outside when a kid ran up to him and said, he sacrificed his queen. And he just never he never got up for the rest of the game. He just sat there. It was like, oh God, oh God. And yes, the correct move actually is to take with the queen. So, knight.
Okay.
The reason why is you deflect the knight away from the center. Now you take the queen. Knight comes back. And then where's that knight going? We said D5. And all of a sudden that would be hanging. So, black has to defend. Except there's not a really good way to defend that F6 square, is there? Knight D5, rook to E6, bishop D4. Like I said, we're putting our squares on their ideal, or our piece on the ideal squares. King there. Is there another piece you can bring in to attack that F6 pawn? What piece is doing nothing in the
I mean,
white
you can
position?
bring your rook in and then lift it. It's slow though.
Yeah. Well, the correct
Yeah.
answer, rook AD1. Doesn't matter how slow it is when black's
Right.
development looks like that. D6. Have to get some counterplay. Rook there, bishop there. And actually, believe it or not, this is when the engine realizes, wait a second, black's in danger. And black has played the top engine move the entire time, since the queen sack.
Engine doesn't approve of the queen sack?
Until now.
Okay.
And like I said, so far black has played the top engine moves after the queen sack, and that includes sacking the knight back, so it's two pieces for the queen. And now the engine's like, wait a second, because it's effectively the horizon effect. It didn't see or conceive that the rook could actually come in. And yeah, there's no defense now for that pawn. Bishop there, hitting the rook. Does anybody want to save your rook on F1? Yeah, no. Kick the queen, because the queen's a terrible defender, and why not? Take on F6. Why would you not take the rook on F1?
Because the bishop is a better piece, more active.
Yeah, the bishop's better than the rook on F1, but the rook on F3 is better than that bishop. So you play bishop to E2 to attack the rook that is useful. Knight H7, check. So, can we take, well actually, sorry, we can't do that, we have to play there. Okay, can somebody explain to me why Can somebody explain why that move is bad?
Rook h3, king g8, rook h8.
Actually,
No?
you're wrong. Because if you play here,
Bishop h5. Okay.
bishop h5,
Yeah, okay.
exactly.
Yeah.
So instead you
Rook
play
f-
here.
okay.
So just to put it on the board for people who haven't seen new variation, bishop there, and well, the attack fizzles out, sadly. I mean, you could try something like g4, but you're just getting extra material. Instead, you play here, and well, the king has to go here, and it's kind of bad.
That's
Here
never
you
good.
run into a lot of problems. What was the correct move? Well, it doesn't really matter. White's gonna win this game. So let's go back to the game position. King g8 was played. Rook h3 is stated. Rook has to block the diagonal. f4. Again, that rook on f1, not really a problem. These pieces are brilliant, yeah?
Is that generally a good idea if you're maybe up in material but kind of in a bad position to start maybe sacrificing some of
Oh
your...
yeah, no, absolutely. If you can take off, trade, not so great defenders, or, trade off your bad pieces for your opponent's good ones, that's a very good thing to do. And especially if your opponent has an attack like this, you should start considering refusing material unless it's obviously bad, and you need to start finding ways to sacrifice your material back to try and alleviate the pressure. Especially rooks, because they tend to actually be quite poor defenders. They're also not great attackers, but so black took. There's nothing really he can do when white refuses to take his material. King f1, there's no reason not to take the bishop. Rook there, and we're trying to sack material back as you stated with the obvious exchange sack, right? I don't think I need to tell you white didn't allow that, but the funny thing is, computer says, yeah, white's doing fine even if he allows rook takes, because the threats on f7 are just too great. But bishop there, and b5. Knight there, putting pressure on f7 as well as h8, and defending it. So this is the point where white cashes in his advantage.
Rook h8, check.
Yeah.
Better than that. There's better than rook h8. I see where you see the idea, but make it work, because rook h8 doesn't actually work.
Okay, rook takes f7 does kind of staunch the wound a bit. What about bishop takes f7, check?
Okay, rook will take, of course.
Then you do rook
Then you do
h8.
it.
Then you do
Yeah,
rook
forward.
h8. Okay, king has to take because I don't
Rook
see.
Or maybe rook h7, right?
No. Rook h8 will work with this. So rook h8. Black's gonna take. Let's be honest, because king g7 is garbage. Because of you take the queen. So king has to take. So king h8. And now I'm assuming you saw the idea when you suggested rook h8
Knight takes
originally.
f7,
Knight takes
check,
f7.
Yep.
Check. Doesn't really matter where the king goes. Your next move is to take that queen, and we've cleared off, and we've got a knight and bishop versus a rook.
It does actually matter where black's king goes next, because if he goes to g7, then the rook's still pinned.
True. It does. Yeah.
So
No. You're right.
King h7 has to be played in that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But the point is that you boil down, and after I prompted you and said that make it work, you did find it. Bishop, rook takes, rook h8, and that's just pretty, by the way.
Triple fork.
Yeah, the family fork. Rook takes here, and actually black resigned in this position. And does anybody want to explain why he resigned? Why he just said, I'm done, I want nothing more to do with this game?
Well, two minor pieces beat a rook, and then.
Yeah, 2 minor pieces will generally beat a rook. White also has an extra pawn.
White's king is more active now.
Yeah, white has a better king, and white has a far better pawn structure. So all the pluses in the position are in favor of white. And even somebody who's not good at ending should be able to win this endgame. But, you know, just because a move looks absolutely crazy does not mean you have to reject it on principle alone. You just have to think about it, analyze it, evaluate where your pieces are going, see if you have a follow-up. If you have a follow-up, it's absolutely worth it to look deeper. And there, boy, was that a follow-up. Speaking of, we're going to move on. Next game, I don't want to save the analysis. This was actually played by myself.
Excuse me, I just wanted to thank you all.
Oh, yeah,
I
of
just
course.
had a brief time to spend here, and
Yeah.
I got a little dog in the car. I've got to run.
Oh,
here,
completely
but
understand,
thank you all.
yeah.
Thank you for the game and the snacks and the lesson.
Yes, sir.
Appreciate it.
Yes,
Y'all have a
sir.
great night.
Sure.
Now this was played by myself. I had the black pieces.
Wait,
So we're
excuse
gonna
me, the library's closed, you can go
flip
out this
the,
way if you want.
yeah, so we're gonna go ahead and flip the board.
Thanks again.
Yes, sir.
And I'm gonna fast forward through the opening, which these knight f3 variations are kind of boring in the Grunfeld. H3, that's not a very critical move. Castles. B6, trying to get some fire into the position, and also the plan is to play here and have a good bishop on this diagonal. Bishop d3. Now, y'all have probably been wondering why I'm taking that pawn on c4. Well, number one, it's generally bad to release tension. So you want your opponent to release the tension. So most of the time, black will want white to take that pawn because it's going to improve the position of his knight and his bishop. So if he plays c takes d4, I play c takes d5. I play knight takes, and my knight's improved because it's closer to the center and it's probing black's position, but my bishop on g7 is also improved because now it's attacking through the center. So that's why you don't take it, right? You want white to take it. Except, this is where you break that rule, because white just developed his bishop. So you're forcing white to spend 2 moves, to get the exact same position. It's, you know, until unless you're at the absolute highest levels, it's normally not a distinction that truly matters. Develop castle, knight there. The knight goes there because I want to play c5, and the knight is better on c5 than it is on c6. That's the whole idea there. And b4, I didn't really think that was a good move. The whole reason for that is because this diagonal is not good. Obviously, the bishop sees through all of this eventually, and it sees a nice rook there. So I can put a lot of pressure on the position there. So knight c3, or sorry, knight e4. I'm not dyslexic, I swear. But yeah, it is a bit of an issue. Rook there. All right, time to evaluate the position. Now there's something tactical going on here first of all.
Knight takes c3, rook takes d8, knight takes e2, check. The king moves, rook takes.
Yeah, and black is just better. So obviously there's something tactical going on here. And in that case, that position, by the way, we'll go ahead and put it on the board because I did actually play knight here. This was not played, however. Take that. Bishop has to take, and then, well, okay. In this position, the material count kind of is the end-all, be-all. In this case, black's just off the rook, and I don't see any compensation for white. But instead, my opponent found something different to respond to me taking that piece.
Bishop takes f7.
Correct.
Okay.
Now, I actually blundered here, but my blunder still works. So the correct move is probably just king h8, and I'm fine. Because the same tactics still exist, except now it's probably even better for black. Because now the knight, once it takes the queen, is it's not getting captured, and you're now a rook and a piece up. You know, a rook and a minor piece up. Instead, I made this blunder. And after here, I honestly considered resigning until I realized something. My pieces are actually kind of good. Second, and weirdly, I also realized white king is not as safe as it appears. And then I realized, once I take that rook, I kind of have the initiative, because what's that queen doing? Queen's under threat. Once I take that rook, rook d1 is a big threat. You know, let's say he plays queen c2, I can take on f3 and play knight d, probably knight d5, or maybe even just play knight e4 initially, and well, okay, I'm making threats all over the place. So I played on, I took it, queen went to c4, pinned the rook, which is perfectly reasonable. Check. And here's the part where I said that king is not as safe as it appears. You take it. Knight d5, and notice how not only are all my pieces great, go ahead. Not only are my pieces great, but how you doing? This isn't really a threat because I can just play rook f8, and now when he moves back here, it's not even a check. So this bishop is not developing anytime soon. I'm sure he can go here, but is that really a concern? You had a question? Oh, I thought you were raising your hand.
No.
Instead, he played queen b3 to threaten my rook, or so he thought. I take this because f2 is hanging, and I'm just acting on, you know, the activity of my pieces. And what is this even for the queen I had? I've got two knights and a rook for the queen, as well as I think, no, actually pawns are equal. So it's two knights and a rook for a queen. I think that's better than a queen, especially with the situation on the board. Okay, bishop develops, defends a rook, and attacks my knight. Problem is that.
Knight e4? Oh.
Yeah,
Yeah,
even
okay.
better. Because now when I play knight e4, assuming he takes the rook, now when I play knight e4, his queen hangs.
Yeah.
So queen moved. May as well give that extra check. Maybe we'll blunder. Obviously, I'm pretty sure this move wins, except it doesn't because that's illegal. So check, king there, check, lots of checks. And now I take this, and I think I've got way too much material for the queen. Like I said, I made a blunder, but my blunder still worked. And yeah, this position is just dead lost for black, and checkmate. Pretty simple.
Earlier, I think couldn't the queen have taken your rook?
Or which
There,
one?
yeah, there.
There?
Well, it might have been a few moves
94
before. But, I mean, yeah, like what's stopping? Oh wait,
The
oh,
knight,
I saw
the
you.
knight covers it, yeah. Alright, so we're gonna move to the next game now. We're gonna skip this one for now and move on to craziest game in the lecture, and considering I showed a game from Yezhmatinov, that's saying something. This game, the first time I saw it, I was amazed this was even possible for a conception like this to occur. And we're going to skip through the opening because it's kind of boring. You know, all these King's Indians, they're kind of all the same-ish to me. And in this case, it actually is the same-ish, but like I said, they're, Now, the knight going to the corner is perfectly okay as long as it can get back out. And in this case, it can get back out via f2. There. Now, I don't know why black didn't castle yet. I really don't. Queen there. e5. Knight there. Knight f8. Okay, so we're going to pause here.
So, quick question.
Yeah.
In general, in the King's Indian, you don't see him keeping the rook there to support the advance.
Yeah, no. Normally in the King's Indian, black is castled. Black typically castled before white, and that's because normally you're breaking with f5 and g5 and playing f4 and then g4. The h pawn doesn't really involve itself in the attack all that much. If you want a good example of a great attacking King's Indian game, I'm going to reference my favorite player again, Rashid Yezhmatinov. His game where he had black pieces against Lev Polygaevsky. Brilliant game, brilliant attack. That's a typical King's Indian game where most of white's play is going to be on the queen side, black's play is going to be on the king side. If you want to watch modern games, Hikaru Nakamura is your player, and he's got some good ones too, including one where he left his queen on pre for like 6 moves in a row. Yeah. So let's evaluate this position because we're trying to figure out what the advantages are and whether or not the material count is the biggest thing that matters, right? So what is the material count, or what is the material situation? Yeah, it's even. The only thing that's been traded is a set of pawns. Okay, whose king is safer? Obviously, that's always the next question I ask. Yeah, white has a far safer king because black's is sitting in the center with no development. Now, obviously, black's plan is pretty simple. He wants to play knight e6 and castle. Now that king side has kind of settled down and you can start planning your normal King's Indian breaks. Who has more space?
White has the queen side, but black has a little bit. You could argue in favor of black on the king side.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the weird thing about space advantages is they're not exactly easy to answer all the time. In this case, he's absolutely correct. Black has more space on the king side. White has more space on the queen side, but black is making an argument.
I would say that
white has way more in the center.
I would say that out of the two, black can't really do anything yet with that space advantage on the king side.
Oh yeah, no, you're absolutely correct on that.
White has a little bit. White has more options at this moment in time.
Yeah, you're absolutely correct. And well, who has more activity? Who's better developed? Should be a simple answer.
White.
White, yeah. Okay. So, how would you form a plan with those answers?
Well, obviously, white wants to keep black's king stuck in the center. So, one thing to look at is knight takes b5.
You want knight takes b5, a la Paul Morphy.
Yeah, well, that won't work. That won't work just yet. You got to play because he's got two pawns.
No, it doesn't work right now.
Yeah.
But you have the right idea of focusing on the queen side. After all, that is what you should be doing as white in the King's Indian.
So
Knight
A4
d5 would be crazy enough to work.
Knight d5 is crazy. Yeah, it's crazy. But it's an interesting idea because let's say black were to take, you would take back with the e pawn, 2 connected passers, not a bad idea.
And they're right where you would want them if you wanted to launch an attack on that king right there.
Yeah, but the weird thing is, that might be a little unforced right now.
I was looking at the bishop on G5.
You want bishop G5, go after.
Go after the pawn, but also just freeze the pawn structure.
Okay.
There on the king side.
So you're arguing that if white can get some material and just hang on, he's okay. It's a reasonable option.
Then black could just play h3.
Yeah.
h3 might be a
Bishop G5, my concern is F6 might be good. Because after takes on H4, G5, all of a sudden black's got those pawns rolling. You have to play bishop back to G3. After knight takes, your pawn structure is completely ruined. And now black can consider options like F5, Queen E7, and all of a sudden black's attack seems to be crashing through, and white has not gotten to the black king stuck in the center. So you need to start focusing on what your plan is. Remember what I said, white should be looking at the queen side in a king's Indian. And in more closed positions, you need to be focused on pawn breaks, because pawn breaks are going to lead to an open position. And we do have an imbalanced position, which is important because you can't win a game of chess without creating an imbalance. So, white plays A4. But what if black doesn't take it and instead decides to kick your knight? Remember how I said those 2 connected passers seemed like a good idea, especially because he suggested it? Yeah, no, knight D5.
Knight D5. Why not?
And here's the thing. What do you do about that as black? Because D6 is coming fast. And hey, Queen B4 might be good. All of a sudden, the E4 square is cleared for the knight. It's not as crazy as it initially sounded when he suggested it. F5. Well, there goes that idea of playing knight E4. But obviously, another benefit of that is that the pawn on D5 also covers E6, which, remember when black played knight E8, I said he wanted to play knight E6? Or knight F8, he wanted to play knight E6? Yeah. The pawn on D5 stops that. D6 as advertised. Queen there. And I believe this is another key position to look at. If white does nothing,
Bishop B5. Go all in.
I'm gonna what narcotics are you on right now? So what's your idea? What if black simply takes it? So I'm talking with the pawn, of course.
Okay, then A takes B5, and you have a double attack on C6 and A8.
Yeah.
So there's that.
Queen would more than likely drop back to B7.
B7.
Do you want to play C6 yourself?
Maybe. I mean,
Yeah,
rook
C6.
Rook F C1. It could be.
Queen has to go back all the way to B8.
Or you could,
or to F7.
actually,
Doesn't
Wait a
really
second.
matter.
Wait a second. Maybe I'm just not following, but you're pushing the pawn. There's nothing supporting the pawn anymore, right?
I'm thinking.
Well, you could take it, but okay. So after Bishop B5, A B5, A B5, Queen B7, C6, you're thinking Queen.
Oh, I'm sorry.
You're thinking Queen takes on B5.
No. I was. I didn't realize we'd exchanged pawns also.
Okay, yeah, no, so we're talking about that variation, but yeah. I mean, Queen B5 would still be a move, but after D7, well, truth is that black is just completely busted. Like, there's no point in analyzing any further, to be honest, after that. Because it really is that bad. So, black actually decided that it was best to just take that pawn rather than retreat.
So rook takes a would be, yep.
Yep. So, we have, okay, what's the material situation here? Because this is where things can get really confusing. When pieces are coming off the board, you're sacrificing pieces, your opponent's giving them back, you know, pawns are getting captured left, right, and center. It can get difficult to follow the material situation. So, count pawns. White has 6, and black has 5, so white's already up a pawn there. If we look at the minor pieces, black has all 4. White has a bishop and a knight. So black's plan needs to be to focus on the light squares, because that's the bishop that white is missing, right? The thing is, though, we move over to the next part, and black only has 1 rook, white has both of them. And, of course, each side has a queen. So we're looking at a position that technically is materially equal. I don't think this is an equal position. I think white is just crushing black here, but it's complicated.
It's a shame that d7 doesn't work yet.
Oh
That
yeah,
would be a nice
d7
way to
doesn't
finish
work.
this.
Plus, it's black to move.
So you want to find a way for d7 to work.
Yeah, so queen c6, threatening the rook. Rook there, f4. That bishop's trapped. Anybody have a good move for white here?
Rook a7. Ignore it.
I like the way you think. Okay, so can anybody tell me why this would be bad?
Rook 7 check.
I mean, that's the
Yeah,
simple
you
answer.
still have to find a way to finish it, though.
Yeah, I'm going to let you think about it. Rook e7 is an interesting move. It's not the best.
Take the bishop.
You want to take the bishop? That may even be worse than... remember, your queen's under threat here.
Oh yeah. Well, sure, but you take it with check.
Oh, you're saying rook takes c8.
I'm sorry. Yeah, take the bishop on the
Okay.
C8, yes.
Yeah. Okay, after queen takes, I'm not sure that
Then check.
white's
then
doing
take
all that
the-
well.
Yeah. Okay. So he's gonna get the knight with check too. So.
Yeah. This is a beautiful move. But it's interesting you notice something. The queen defends c8. Is there a way to get the queen off of that square?
Queen d5.
Okay. If it takes, mate.
Sweet.
Never thought you'd see that pattern in a middle game, did you?
So first, I would think black.
So
would
rook
take-
a7 was the correct move, and it was played by Serper, who lives in Seattle now. And no, absolutely. By the way, I would love it if this game had ended pawn takes f4, queen d5, queen d5, rook c8. I would love that, because that's just a beautiful finish for a game that just had an amazing idea. But the idea gets even better. Knight d7 was played. Oh, I'm going to castle and your attack means nothing. And then you're going to be down a piece.
Rook takes c8. Check.
Yep, we're going back to that idea. May as well sack and exchange. Queen takes, and yeah. Black's not castling. But doesn't that just give up the bishop? So
No, because rook.
white's down 2 minor pieces and only has a pawn for it.
Rook a8's coming, and that'll cause
Rook
some.
a8 will cause some problems, absolutely, but there's better.
Okay.
Get the check. Come on, man. Horse
Okay,
is the king to
okay.
move.
Okay.
Can't move to d8 because that's checkmate.
Okay.
So he has to move to f8. Hey, you get your knight back. And, lo and behold, you're threatening checkmate as well. But, doesn't it allow black to get even more material and give you some problems. So, this is an interesting one. This is probably actually the most important move of the game. Because you make the wrong move here, black wins. You're, of course, in check. I don't recommend king h1 because,
That's the problem.
yeah, pawn promotes. I make a rook because it's funnier. And you have to decide between king f1 and king takes pawn.
Seems like f1 would actually be the safer of the two at this point.
Well, can you explain why?
Because queen takes c5 check, and all of a sudden, there might, if not be a perpetual at the very minimum, black's got some counterplay to squeeze out of the game.
Oh yeah, and
Yeah.
if white doesn't go for a perpetual, you might be walking into a royal fork.
You
Yeah.
have the knight on h5 to worry about.
So
too.
you're trying to avoid throwing the game. Yeah, okay. And you're absolutely correct that if king takes here, that's the big problem. I'm not sure it really matters. King, I would want to stay off the light squares because
Knight at 4.
that would allow, well, yeah, the knight fork, so, and if you go here, we're getting dangerously close to getting checkmated here.
Well, you still have to worry about f7. So
Yeah.
it's still a mess.
Check, king has to go here, otherwise fork. Queen goes here. King goes, doesn't matter.
It's more like
We might-
perpetual. Yeah.
I'm trying to remember why.
Can you sack the knight on that move and bring the pawn in?
I'm trying to remember what.
If you ever get another
is.
chance,
That would be
if you
a
go to one-
perpetual, so.
Well, no, can you
we
sack
wanna
the
go
knight?
here.
The problem is you don't have enough time to capture on g3 because queen f7 mates.
Yeah. Yeah. At the very least, you're throwing away a brilliancy for a perpetual. So, you're absolutely correct. King f1 is the correct move and was played in the game. Offering.
Rook e7?
Yeah, rook f7. Queen took. Check. Not taking the queen because now you ensure that you promote. So, by the way, that not taking the pawn on f2, the typical term is calling that an umbrella pawn. And all that means is the pawn protects your king even though it's your opponent's piece. Black decided to move the king instead of, trading queens and doing it that way. It leads to vaguely a similar position. Check. And back then, like our club championship, you had 2 time controls. So you had, I think it was like 90 minutes for the first 40 moves, and it moved 40, you got extra time. So obviously these players were very low on time at this point. So you're going to see something where here, where the players repeat moves, but they don't repeat 3 times. And the reason they do this is so they make the time control without making a critical game-altering decision. Because if you make one of those and it turns out you were wrong and you just made time control, well, all of a sudden you're sitting there with a ton of time on your clock and realizing, yeah, I'm dead lost. So
Extra time to
now,
sit.
yeah, it's basically saying timeout, let's reach the time control first. So now white takes the rook, sacking the queen. Notice how he sacked literally every piece he's had. And he promotes to a 3rd queen. Bishop there. queen there, and the important thing is that white is actually trying to get black onto the correct color complex and the correct square so that he can take the pawn that matters in the position. And this is where he does it. Because guess what? The king side is what matters right now. Because this pawn is stopped, these pawns are blockaded. So you want to get after whatever remains of black's counterplay by going after the g6 pawn and the black pieces right here.
So why did the black king move away from the king side there, and what looks like he might have found
Well,
safety?
eventually there was going to be some series of checks that was going to lead to one of those being won. And if you stayed on the king side, you're not really getting any counterplay if you just stay there and defend and defend and defend. Because eventually white's just going to say, oh, you're going to do that? I'm going to take that pawn on b4, and I'm going to make another queen. So, black's really trying to not be on the wrong side of a brilliancy here. So, can anybody tell me what the correct move here is for
King
white?
takes f2.
Yeah, it's time to take that umbrella pawn, but you don't want to take the one on e2
Knight f4.
because a very unfortunate move.
That would be a shameful way to end the game.
A game where white is playing possessed by the spirit of Tal. He loses. So he played king f2 and one final try.
Huh. That's not bad, actually.
That's
Because you can't
clever.
take either of them. You have to play king e1.
Yes. So the problem here is variation is unfortunately you just lost the game. So, and the problem with here is the same as it was before. So, yeah, black resigned here. This was the final position, and that game left an impression on me because when I saw it, I was like,
Bishop
wow.
Bishop e3 is a kind of move you throw in bullet and just pray.
Yeah. Now, unfortunately, we don't have time to look at my caveman variation of the accelerated dragon, but it's fun. If you're interested, I can tell you afterwards. But thank you all for coming and listening.